Okay, let's dive right into this. I want you to take a second and ask yourself a slightly uncomfortable question. How good are you at lying? Seriously, think about the internal mechanics of it for a minute. Are you the type who immediately starts sweating, stumbles over your words, and totally gives yourself away before you've even finished a sentence? Or can you effortlessly spin a tale so incredibly airtight that absolutely everyone buys it? Look, we all tell little fibs from time to time, right? Usually just to grease the wheels of social interaction or maybe spare friends' feelings. But some people have elevated deception to an absolute art form. And today, we're taking a psychological masterclass on exactly how they do it.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating study published in PLOS One that effectively reverse engineers the exact tactics used by successful liars. We're going to literally open up the good liar's playbook. We'll be looking specifically at their verbal strategies, the highly calculated word choices and structural storytelling techniques they use to deceive us every single day without triggering any alarms whatsoever.
But before we get to the really advanced strategies, we need to understand the baseline behavior of the general public. And this number right here, it might genuinely surprise you. 39%. According to the study, 39% of people report telling absolutely zero lies in a given 24-hour period. Zero. That means a massive chunk of the population goes through an average day claiming to be completely 100% honest in every single interaction. Crazy, right?
Now, this perfectly illustrates the highly skewed landscape of lying. The distribution of deception is definitely not even across the board. In fact, less than 1% of people are what the researchers categorize as prolific liars. But here's the kicker. This tiny, hyperactive fraction of the population accounts for a massive 38.5% of all the lies told. So the vast majority of falsehoods floating around in our daily conversations, they're actually being generated by a very small, very practiced group of people.
Section 1. Who tells all the lies? Inside the world of the prolific deceiver.
So if such a tiny group is doing all the heavy lifting when it comes to deception, who exactly are they targeting? Well, the data is incredibly revealing. People who rate themselves as good liars aren't generally telling massive, life-altering fabrications to their immediate family. Instead, they tell mostly inconsequential white lies, and they heavily concentrate those lies toward colleagues and friends. It seems the social distance of a workplace or a casual friendship is just the perfect testing ground for a skilled deceiver. You see, the stakes are just high enough to matter, but not quite so high that a fractured family bond is on the line.
Now, you might be thinking it's way easier to lie behind the safety of a digital screen, right? But nope. Good liars strongly and strategically prefer face-to-face interactions to deliver their lies. They absolutely do not hide behind text messages, emails, or social media. They execute their deception in person. And why? It's likely because they feel supremely confident in their ability to manage the interaction in real time. They can read their target's micro-reactions and adjust their verbal delivery right there on the fly, ensuring the lie lands perfectly.
Section 2. Words matter more than actions. Busting the great nonverbal myth. For decades, society has trained us to look for physical tells. We've been completely conditioned to expect liars to sweat profusely, fidget with their hands, and constantly avert their gaze. I mean, it's a trope in basically every detective show on television. But the crucial point from the data is that self-reported good liars completely bypass these nonverbal tricks. They aren't worried about their hands or whether they're making too much eye contact. Instead, they are focused entirely on their words. They rely heavily on methodical, highly calculated verbal strategies, crafting statements that are clear, plausible, and incredibly difficult to untangle.
Section 3. Embedding lies in the truth. The core strategy of the skilled deceiver.
Okay, we are now officially opening the good liar's playbook, and their most common, absolute most formidable weapon is the embedded lie. What is that? It's a statement containing one or more falsehoods seamlessly incorporated into an otherwise completely truthful story. Good liars know that inventing a whole new reality out of thin air is just a terrible strategy. It takes way too much mental effort to maintain over time, so instead, they use the truth as camouflage. They bury the lie so deeply within verifiable facts that it becomes virtually impossible to spot where reality ends and the fiction begins.
Let's break down the exact mechanics of how they actually pull this off. First, you rely on a completely truthful previous experience from your actual memory. That builds a rock-solid foundation. Then, you strictly match the amount of deceptive details to the truthful ones. You also match the type of deceptive details to the truthful ones. So, if the true part relies on a distinct sensory detail, like a specific smell or a loud sound, the fabricated part gets sensory details too. Finally, you sprinkle in unverifiable details. These are things the listener literally cannot check. Things like a private conversation with someone who isn't there, a fleeting internal thought, or, a dead phone battery. By following this precise formula, the liar avoids cognitive overload for themselves while totally confusing anyone trying to fact-check their story.
There's a quote straight from the researchers that perfectly sums up these mechanics. It says, "Liars typically aim to provide as much experience information as possible, to the extent that they do not incriminate themselves. This strategy works flawlessly, because truths are effortlessly drawn from human memory, while pure lies have to be painstakingly drawn from imagination. By using memory for 90% of the story, the liar sounds completely authentic, because for the most part, they are genuinely just recounting a real memory."
Which brings us to Section 4. Keep it simple and plausible, minimizing risk and maximizing belief.
Good liars know that complexity is the absolute enemy of a successful deception. Their entire story management relies on keeping statements perfectly clear and simple, which naturally ensures the overall account sounds highly plausible. Because let's face it, implausibility is the fastest way to get caught in a lie. The moment a story becomes overly convoluted, our brain's logic centers light up, and we naturally start asking follow-up questions. But a master deceiver, they engineer their story to be so straightforward and remarkably logical that your brain just smoothly accepts it, completely shutting down your natural instinct to investigate any further.
When we actually compare poor liars to good liars, we see completely opposite strategies at play. Poor liars typically try to hide by being intentionally vague, constantly changing the subject, and visibly omitting information. But think about it, that vagueness actually raises our suspicion almost immediately. Good liars, on the other hand, don't hide in the shadows. They hide right in plain sight. They provide information that is remarkably clear and strategically detailed. They give you exactly enough information to satisfy your curiosity and make the story feel whole, without over-explaining and accidentally trapping themselves in a contradiction.
And finally, Section 5. Unmasking the skilled liar. Why the playbook works.
So, why is catching a good liar so incredibly difficult in the real world? Let's treat this as the climax of everything we've learned today. First, their statements closely resemble truthful ones because, well, structurally and historically, they are mostly true. Second, they ruthlessly capitalize on our inherent truth bias. That's our deep psychological default to simply believe what people tell us in everyday social interactions. Because assuming someone is lying takes social energy we usually just don't want to spend. Third, those unverifiable details we discussed, they act as an impenetrable investigative shield. You literally can't prove a negative. And finally, because they are so phenomenally skilled verbally, standard content-based lie detection tools often just flat out fail against them.
So, the absolute central takeaway you need to remember from this explainer is this. If a liar draws mostly on their memory of truthful experiences, their statement becomes nearly indistinguishable from reality. And that is the true, terrifying power of verbal deception strategies. The most successful deceivers aren't beating you by outsmarting you with some massive cinematic fabrication. No way. They are beating you by methodically using the truth against you.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to ponder. The next time a colleague or a friend sits down right across from you and tells you a perfectly simple, highly plausible story face to face, are you just going to nod and automatically agree? Or will you pause and look for the embedded lie? Take this playbook, apply it to how you evaluate credibility in your own life, and always stay curious. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.